The day Sheriff Caleb Dawson placed handcuffs on the woman he once planned to marry, the entire town believed justice had been served. The evidence seemed undeniable. Sarah Whitmore had been accused of robbing a payroll stagecoach, and a respected deputy lay dead because of it. Standing in front of friends, neighbors, and the woman he still loved, Caleb made the most painful decision of his life. He chose the law over his heart, believing that no one, not even the woman who had once dreamed of building a future with him, could stand above justice. Sarah never begged for mercy. She never denied the charges. She never even tried to explain why she had been at the scene. Instead, she looked Caleb in the eyes as he locked the handcuffs around her wrists and quietly whispered, "One day, you'll understand why I had to let you hate me." Just days later, Sarah vanished during a prison transfer. The town called her an outlaw. Newspapers claimed she had escaped. Wanted posters spread across the frontier, and her name became a warning told to children. Caleb spent years believing the woman he loved had betrayed everything they once shared. But 15 years later, one dying man's confession uncovered a truth so shocking that it shattered everything the sheriff thought he knew. Sarah had never disappeared to escape justice. She disappeared to protect an innocent life, and the real criminals had been hiding in plain sight all along. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. Leave a comment to say hello, because I truly enjoy seeing people from all around the world joining these stories together. If you're starting your morning, I wish you a peaceful and wonderful day ahead. And if you enjoy heartfelt Western stories filled with mystery, sacrifice, and second chances, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next journey. Now, let's travel back to the dusty frontier, where one sheriff's greatest mistake would become the case that changed his life forever. The morning sun had barely climbed above the distant mesas when Sheriff Caleb Dawson fastened the last button on his weathered coat and studied the folded warrant lying across his desk. He had read it 5 times before dawn and knew every word by heart. Yet the ink still refused to make sense. Sarah Whitmore, charged with the armed robbery of the Black Creek payroll stagecoach, suspected in the death of Deputy Owen Briggs, ordered to be taken into custody immediately. Caleb closed his eyes for a brief moment. Just 3 weeks earlier, he had been measuring lumber for the small house they planned to build together on a piece of land overlooking the river. Sarah had laughed as she argued over where the front porch should face so they could watch the sunset every evening. She had slipped her hand into his and told him she wanted a life filled with ordinary days. Now the only paper bearing her name was an arrest warrant carrying the county seal. A knock sounded at the office door. Deputy Martin Ellis stepped inside, removing his hat. "Folks say she's still at the old Whitmore ranch." Caleb nodded without looking up. "Any trouble?" "No, Sheriff. She hasn't run." That answer unsettled Caleb more than any report of resistance could have. If Sarah were guilty, why stay where everyone knew she would be found? If she were innocent, why had she never come to him after the robbery? The questions had circled endlessly through his mind since the stagecoach was discovered 2 days earlier. The payroll strongbox had been broken open. Deputy Briggs lay dead beside the road. Witnesses claimed they saw Sarah riding away from the scene shortly before sunset. Her horse had been identified. Her scarf had been found tangled in a nearby cedar bush. Most damaging of all, several bags containing payroll money had been recovered inside an abandoned shed on land belonging to her late father. Every piece of evidence pointed toward one conclusion. Caleb hated that conclusion with every part of himself. He secured his revolver, picked up the warrant, and walked outside. The town already knew where he was going. Conversations stopped as he crossed the dusty main street. Shopkeepers watched silently from their doorways. Mothers gathered children closer. No one greeted him. No one wished him luck. Everyone understood that the sheriff was about to arrest the woman he intended to marry. The ride to the Whitmore Ranch felt longer than it ever had before. Every bend in the trail reminded Caleb of happier days. He remembered teaching Sarah to fish along the creek after a spring rain. He remembered dancing with her during the harvest festival beneath strings of lanterns. He remembered kneeling beside the old cottonwood tree 6 months earlier, asking her to marry him. She had answered before he finished the question. The ranch house appeared beyond a line of weathered fences. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. Nothing about the place suggested panic or escape. Sarah stood near the horse corral, brushing a chestnut mare. She looked toward the approaching rider before he reached the gate. Their eyes met across the yard. Neither smiled. Caleb climbed down from his horse slowly. Sarah rested the brush on the fence rail and waited. "I wondered how long it'd take," she said quietly. Caleb searched her face for fear, anger, or surprise. Instead, he found only exhaustion. "Sarah." He stopped, unable to finish. She noticed the folded warrant in his hand. "So it's true." "You know why I'm here?" She lowered her eyes for only a second. "Yes." Caleb stepped closer. "Tell me the witnesses are wrong." She remained silent. "Tell me someone planted the money." Silence again. His voice tightened. "Tell me anything that lets me believe this isn't real." Sarah looked directly into his eyes. There was sadness there, but not the desperation he expected. "I can't." The words struck harder than any bullet. Caleb unfolded the warrant with trembling hands. "You're accused of robbing the payroll coach and causing Deputy Briggs's death." Sarah said nothing. "Did you do it?" She closed her eyes briefly before answering. "I can't answer that." "Can't?" Caleb repeated. "Or won't." She opened her eyes again. "There's a difference." Frustration and heartbreak collided inside him. "Then help me understand the difference." A gentle breeze stirred the dry grass between them. Somewhere beyond the barn, a windmill creaked steadily. Sarah seemed to study every familiar corner of the ranch before looking back at Caleb. "If I tell you what you want to hear," she whispered, "other people will pay the price." Caleb frowned. "Who?" She shook her head. "I can't say." "Sarah, a deputy is dead." Pain crossed her face. "I know." "Then why won't you defend yourself?" Tears gathered in her eyes but never fell. "Because some things matter more than what people think of me." Caleb struggled to make sense of her words. Nothing she said sounded like the confession of a murderer. Yet neither was it a denial. He had sworn an oath before the town to uphold the law without favor. That promise had always seemed simple until the law stood wearing the face of the woman he loved. He looked once more toward the ranch house where they had planned their future together. Every dream waiting inside suddenly felt impossibly distant. Slowly, he removed the pair of iron handcuffs hanging from his belt. Sarah extended her wrists before he even asked. His hands shook as he fastened the first cuff. She noticed immediately. "Caleb." He could not meet her eyes. "Don't make this harder." "I'm trying not to." The second cuff clicked shut. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. At last, Caleb drew a slow breath. "I'm sorry." Sarah gave the faintest smile, one filled not with bitterness, but with heartbreaking tenderness. "You were always going to do your duty." He finally looked at her. "If there's something I should know." She stepped closer until only the chain between the cuffs separated them. Her voice became almost too quiet to hear. "One day, you'll understand why I had to let you hate me." Before Caleb could ask what she meant, riders appeared at the end of the lane. Curious townspeople had followed at a distance, expecting the arrest. They watched in complete silence as the sheriff escorted Sarah toward his horse. No one cheered. No one cursed her. The sight hurt too much for celebration. Caleb helped her into the wagon brought for prisoners rather than forcing her to climb alone. As they started back toward town, Sarah looked once over her shoulder at the ranch disappearing behind them. She never looked back again. 3 days later, while being transported to the territorial prison under armed guard, Sarah Whitmore vanished without leaving a single trace. The news spread across Black Creek before the prison wagon had even returned. Sarah Whitmore had vanished somewhere along the rocky stretch between Cotton Pass and the Territorial Road. By sunset, every version of the story carried a different ending. Some claimed she had slipped her hand from the irons and disappeared into the hills. Others insisted masked riders had ambushed the escort. A few swore she had jumped into the river below the canyon bridge and drowned. No one agreed on what had happened. They agreed only on one thing. Sarah Whitmore was gone. Sheriff Caleb Dawson refused to rely on rumors. Before dawn the following morning, he rode to the place where the prison guard said they had last seen her. The wagon tracks still scarred the dusty trail. Boot prints surrounded a narrow bend overlooking the canyon, but the hard ground revealed little else. Caleb examined broken brush, searched the creek below, and followed every faint trail leading into the hills. Nothing lasted more than a few yards before disappearing into stone. The escort captain repeated the same account several times. Sarah had asked for water during a short stop. One guard had stepped away to refill a canteen. When he turned back, she was simply gone. Caleb listened without interruption. "A woman in handcuffs doesn't disappear into open country," he finally said. The captain lowered his eyes. "I know how it sounds. Did anyone fire a shot?" "No." "Did anyone see another rider?" "No, Sheriff." Caleb studied the empty landscape again. There should have been tracks. There should have been signs of a struggle. There should have been something. Instead, the canyon held only silence. Search parties spent 6 days combing the surrounding hills. Ranchers rode fence lines. Volunteers searched abandoned cabins. Deputies questioned travelers heading east and west. Every effort ended the same way. Sarah had vanished without leaving behind a single trace. A week later, the territorial marshal officially declared her an escaped prisoner. New warrants were issued. Wanted posters appeared on telegraph poles, outside post offices, and beside saloon doors across neighboring counties. Sarah's face, once known for welcoming smiles at church socials and harvest dances, now stared from rough paper beneath bold letters identifying her as an outlaw. Caleb watched one poster being nailed outside the general store. He remained on horseback until the carpenter finished before quietly riding away. He could not bring himself to look at it again. The investigation into the payroll robbery soon faded. The stolen money recovered at the Whitmore property remained powerful evidence. Deputy Owen Briggs was buried with full honors. Townspeople spoke less about the robbery itself and more about the woman who had escaped justice. Some insisted Caleb had shown too much mercy because of their past. Others argued he should have recognized her guilt long before the robbery. Caleb answered neither criticism. Every evening after finishing his reports, he unlocked the evidence cabinet and reviewed the case file once more. Witness statements, inventory of recovered payroll bags, sketches of the crime scene, Sarah's signed booking papers. Each page told the same story, yet none explained the expression on her face when she said, "One day, you'll understand why I had to let you hate me." Months passed. Seasons changed. The small house Caleb had planned to build was never started. The lumber weathered behind the sheriff's office until he finally sold it to another family. The engagement ring remained inside its small velvet box, locked in the bottom drawer of his desk. More than once he considered returning it to the Whitmore Ranch, but the property had already been sold to settle outstanding debts after Sarah's disappearance. Eventually, he stopped opening the drawer altogether. Time continued moving, whether he wanted it to or not. New families arrived. Others moved away. Children grew into adults. Businesses changed hands. Caleb remained sheriff because the town trusted his fairness, even if many pitied the loneliness that followed him wherever he went. Friends occasionally suggested he should marry again. He always answered politely before changing the subject. No one mentioned Sarah in his presence anymore. 15 years slipped quietly across the frontier. Gray appeared at Caleb's temples. The deep lines around his eyes reflected long years beneath the western sun, as much as the burden he carried inside. The wanted posters faded from wind and rain, replaced by newer notices bearing unfamiliar names. Yet one copy remained carefully folded inside the sheriff's archives, preserved as part of the official record. Caleb never removed it. On a cool autumn morning, a young deputy named Noah Dawson reported for his first day. Though they shared a surname, they were not related. Noah possessed the energy Caleb himself had once carried when he first pinned on a badge. He asked questions eagerly, believed every problem had a solution, and greeted nearly everyone in town by name before the end of his first week. Caleb found the optimism refreshing, even if he rarely admitted it. Together they handled livestock disputes, missing horses, drunken arguments, and the ordinary troubles that filled small-town life. Noah noticed one locked drawer in Caleb's desk that was never opened during office hours. He never asked about it. One afternoon, after helping settle a disagreement between neighboring ranchers, Caleb stopped by the office of Dr. Samuel Pierce for his annual examination. The physician had grown older as well. His hair had turned completely white, and his hands trembled slightly while preparing medical instruments, though his eyes remained sharp. After finishing the examination, the doctor hesitated longer than usual before speaking. "You're still carrying old burdens." Caleb smiled faintly. "Comes with the badge, Doctor." Pierce slowly removed his spectacles. "Not all of them." Caleb understood immediately. "It's been 15 years. "Yes." "If Sarah were alive, someone would have seen her." The doctor's expression became strangely distant. "Perhaps." Caleb frowned. "You don't sound convinced." Dr. Pierce looked toward the window overlooking the quiet street. "Sheriff, there are times in life when what appears obvious isn't the whole truth." Caleb waited, expecting more. None came. "Are you telling me someone lied?" he asked. The doctor sighed heavily. "I'm telling you only this. Don't assume every answer was buried with the past." Before Caleb could question him further, hurried footsteps echoed from the front waiting room. The doctor's assistant opened the examination door. "Doctor," she said quietly, "there's a messenger from the county prison. He says a former guard is dying, and he's asking for Sheriff Dawson by name. Caleb Dawson left for the county prison before sunrise the following morning. Noah insisted on driving the wagon while Caleb reviewed the brief message delivered the previous afternoon. The note contained only a few lines. Former prison guard William Harlan, gravely ill, requests Sheriff Caleb Dawson immediately. No explanation, no details. During the 3-hour journey, neither man spoke much. Noah sensed that whatever waited at the prison belonged to a chapter of Caleb's life rarely discussed. When the stone walls of the aging prison finally appeared beyond the ridge, a cold wind swept across the yard. The warden met them outside the infirmary. "He doesn't have much time," the older man said quietly. "He's asked for no family. Only you." Caleb removed his hat. "How long was he stationed here?" "Nearly 30 years. Retired after his health failed." The warden hesitated before adding, "He's carried something for a long time." Caleb entered the dim infirmary alone. William Harlan looked much older than his years. His breathing came slowly, and one thin hand rested above a faded blanket. The moment he recognized Caleb, his tired eyes filled with relief. "Sheriff Dawson," he whispered. Caleb stepped closer. "I'm here." Harlan motioned weakly toward the chair beside the bed. Caleb sat without speaking. For several moments, only the ticking of a wall clock filled the room. At last, the old guard gathered enough strength to continue. "I've asked God for one more chance to tell the truth." Caleb listened carefully. "About what?" Harlan closed his eyes briefly. "Sarah Whitmore." Every muscle in Caleb's body tightened. 15 years had passed since anyone connected to the prison had spoken her name directly to him. "Go on," he said quietly. The old man's voice trembled. "She didn't escape." Caleb stared at him without moving. "What did you say?" "She never escaped." Harlan struggled for breath before continuing. "I opened the cell wagon myself." The room seemed to fall completely silent. Caleb searched the man's face for any sign of confusion brought on by illness, but found only sorrow. "You released her?" Harlan nodded slowly. "Yes." Caleb rose from the chair. "Do you understand what you're saying? I've lived with it every day." "Why?" Harlan looked toward the window where morning light touched the dusty glass. "Because she begged me for one thing." Caleb waited. "Not freedom," Harlan whispered. "Time." Caleb frowned. "Time for what?" "She wouldn't tell me everything." Harlan coughed painfully before continuing. "She said if she reached someone before they found her, an innocent life could still be saved." Caleb remained standing. "Who?" "She wouldn't give a name." "Did she admit robbing the stagecoach?" "No." "Did she admit killing Deputy Briggs?" "Never." The old guard's breathing became uneven again. She only repeated that if she stayed in prison, someone else would die. Caleb's thoughts raced. For 15 years, he had believed Sarah disappeared by chance or by careful planning. He had never imagined someone inside the prison had deliberately opened the door. "Why did you believe her?" he finally asked. Harlan smiled faintly. "Because I watched her for 3 days." Caleb said nothing. "Murderers fear punishment," Harlan continued. "Sarah feared running out of time." The words settled heavily between them. Caleb remembered her expression at the ranch, the sadness, the strange calm, the refusal to defend herself while desperately trying to protect something she refused to name. "After I released her," Harlan whispered, "she made me promise one thing. What promise? When the danger is over, tell Caleb I never stopped trusting him. Caleb lowered his hand. For years he had believed Sarah's silence meant betrayal. Now every memory suddenly seemed uncertain. Why wait 15 years? He asked quietly. Tears gathered in the old guard's eyes. Cowardice. He took another slow breath. I kept telling myself I'd speak tomorrow. His voice broke. Then tomorrow became 15 years. Caleb gently sat down again. Anger rose inside him, but it was quickly overtaken by pity. The dying man had punished himself longer than any court ever could. Harlan reached beneath his blanket with trembling hands. After several attempts, he pulled out a sealed envelope worn soft with age. Caleb recognized his own name written across the front in faded ink. She left this with me, Harlan said. She told me not to give it to anyone unless I believed the danger had truly passed or unless I knew I was dying. Caleb accepted the envelope carefully. The paper felt fragile beneath his fingers. The wax seal had never been broken. I never read it, Harlan whispered. It wasn't mine. Caleb looked down at the envelope for several long moments before slipping it carefully inside his coat. Thank you for telling me. Harlan nodded weakly. Can you forgive an old fool? Caleb answered honestly. I don't know yet. The old guard accepted the reply with a faint smile. Fair enough. Before leaving, Caleb removed his hat once more. I'll find the truth, he said quietly. Harlan closed his eyes. I believe you will. Minutes later, the prison bell rang softly across the yard. William Harlan had passed away. Noah waited beside the wagon without asking questions. He saw Caleb's expression and understood that something extraordinary had happened. The ride home remained almost completely silent. Only after they stopped beside the sheriff's office did Noah finally speak. Whatever was in that room. Caleb slowly removed the sealed envelope from inside his coat. It changes everything. That evening, alone in his office, he carefully broke the faded wax seal. Inside lay a single folded sheet of paper and a small hand-drawn map. Sarah's familiar handwriting covered only one short paragraph. There was no explanation of the robbery, no confession, no defense. Only one sentence beneath the map. If you ever learn the truth, find Emma before anyone else does. The map Sarah left behind showed no town name, only a winding creek, an abandoned mill, and a small church marked with a faded cross. Caleb spread it across his desk as the morning light filled the sheriff's office. Noah studied the hand-drawn landmarks beside him. You think this Emma is still there? He asked. Caleb folded the paper carefully. If Sarah wanted me to find her after all these years, it's the only place to begin. They left before noon, following the old county road south through rolling prairie and narrow cottonwood valleys. The farther they traveled, the fewer people they encountered. Many homesteads marked on older survey maps had long since been abandoned. Fences leaned with age, and empty barns stood quietly against the wind. Caleb compared every bend in the road with Sarah's drawing until late in the afternoon, they reached the remains of an old mill beside a shallow creek. The roof had partially collapsed, but the stone foundation matched the sketch exactly. We're close, Caleb said. A mile farther stood a white wooden church no larger than a schoolhouse. Beyond it stretched a small farming community built around a handful of homes, a blacksmith shop, and a general store. Nothing about the place suggested anyone had been hiding there. Caleb entered the store first. The elderly shopkeeper greeted them politely before returning to his ledger. We're looking for someone, Caleb said. "A young woman named Emma." The shopkeeper frowned thoughtfully. "Emma Reed." Caleb glanced at Noah. "Yes?" "Lives on the Miller farm just east of here. Teaches reading to the younger children when the harvest season slows." Caleb thanked him without asking another question. As they stepped outside, Noah noticed the sheriff's expression. "You don't seem surprised." Caleb looked toward the eastern fields. Sarah's map ended here for a reason. The Miller farm rested beside a broad pasture bordered by old oak trees. Chickens wandered freely across the yard, while two children chased one another near the porch. A young woman knelt beside a vegetable garden, carefully tying climbing beans to wooden stakes. She stood when the wagon approached and brushed dirt from her hands. "Can I help you?" she asked. Caleb removed his hat. "Are you Emma Reed?" "I am." She looked no older than 17. Her dark hair had been tied back with a faded ribbon, and her calm gray eyes reminded Caleb unexpectedly of someone he had known long ago. "I'm Sheriff Caleb Dawson," he said. "This is Deputy Noah Dawson." Emma smiled politely. "You're a long way from home, Sheriff." "May we ask you a few questions?" She invited them onto the porch without hesitation. An older farming couple soon joined them, introducing themselves as Jonathan and Martha Miller. They explained they had raised Emma since she was a small child after distant relatives asked them for help. "She's family," Martha said warmly. Caleb believed her. Nothing about the household suggested deception. Emma poured coffee for the visitors before sitting across from them. "What is this about?" she asked. Caleb chose his words carefully. "We're trying to locate a woman named Sarah Whitmore." At the sound of the name, Emma's gentle smile faded into quiet recognition. "Aunt Sarah." Caleb felt his pulse quicken. "You know her?" Emma nodded. "Of course." "When did you last see her?" "Almost 2 years ago." Noah glanced quickly toward Caleb. Emma continued before either man spoke. "She visited whenever she could, never for long, sometimes only an afternoon." Caleb struggled to keep his voice steady. "Did she tell you where she lived?" Emma shook her hand. "No. She always said traveling was safer if fewer people knew her plans." "Safer." Emma lowered her eyes. That's the word she used. Caleb noticed she seemed completely unaware of Sarah's history as a wanted outlaw. "What did she tell you about herself?" Emma smiled faintly. "Only that she'd promised my parents she'd look after me." "Your parents?" "They died before I was old enough to remember them." Martha reached across the table and gently touched Emma's hand. "Sarah helped with expenses over the years," she explained. "Money arrived through different people, never directly." "Did she ever explain why?" Caleb asked. Jonathan answered this time. "She said only that she'd made a promise she intended to keep." Emma disappeared into the house for a moment before returning with a small wooden box. Inside were birthday cards, pressed wildflowers, and short letters written in the same careful handwriting Caleb had seen inside the sealed envelope. None of the notes contained a return address. Each simply encouraged Emma to study hard, be kind, and remember that she was deeply loved. Caleb recognized Sarah's quiet warmth in every line. Emma handed him one folded paper. "This is my favorite." Caleb read only a few sentences before returning it respectfully. Sarah had written, "The world may not always tell you the truth about people. Judge them by the kindness they leave behind." His chest tightened. The woman described in these letters seemed impossible to reconcile with the outlaw named on the old wanted posters. "Did Aunt Sarah ever seem frightened?" Noah asked gently. Emma considered the question. "Sometimes she'd stop talking if strangers rode past the farm, but she never appeared afraid for herself." Who was she worried about? Emma looked puzzled. Me, I think. Silence settled across the porch. Caleb realized Sarah had maintained contact for years while carefully protecting both her own location and Emma's identity, yet she had never once reached out to him. The thought hurt more than he expected, though he could no longer blame her without knowing the full truth. As the afternoon sun drifted lower, Caleb thanked the Millers for their hospitality before leaving. Emma walked with him to the wagon. "Sheriff," she asked quietly, "if you find Aunt Sarah, tell her I'm all right." Caleb looked at the hopeful young woman standing beside the gate. "I'll tell her." It was the first promise he had made about Sarah in 15 years. As Noah prepared the horses, Emma remembered something. "Wait!" She hurried back inside and returned carrying an old framed photograph. "She asked me to keep this safe." Caleb accepted it carefully. The faded picture showed Sarah standing beside a tall rancher wearing work clothes and a broad smile. Between them stood a little girl no more than 2 years old. Caleb recognized Sarah immediately, but the man beside her was someone he had seen only once before in official records connected to the payroll robbery, the murdered ranch owner whose death had been treated as an unrelated tragedy. Caleb and Noah returned to Black Creek with the faded photograph wrapped carefully inside Caleb's coat. Neither man spoke much during the journey. The image had unsettled them both. Sarah had known the murdered ranch owner well enough to stand beside him with a smiling child between them. Yet nothing from the original investigation had ever mentioned such a relationship. Back at the sheriff's office, Caleb unlocked the old evidence cabinet for the first time in years. Dust covered the payroll robbery files, but every document remained exactly where he had placed it after the investigation closed. Noah carried the photograph to the desk while Caleb spread witness statements, crime scene sketches, and evidence inventories across the worn wooden surface. "Let's start at the beginning," Caleb said. "This time, we question everything." Noah nodded. "Even the parts everyone accepted." Caleb looked at the faded warrant still clipped inside the case file. "Especially those." The original reports painted a straightforward story. The payroll stagecoach had left Red Bluff shortly after sunrise carrying wages for railroad workers. Deputy Owen Briggs rode alongside as armed protection. Near a narrow canyon crossing, the coach had been stopped. Briggs was found dead beside the road. The payroll strongbox had been forced open. Sarah had been seen leaving the area on horseback less than an hour later. Money later recovered on Whitmore property appeared to complete the case. 15 years earlier, the evidence had seemed overwhelming. Now Caleb noticed details he had overlooked. He compared every statement line by line instead of reading only the conclusions written beneath them. Noah organized the papers according to the order in which investigators had collected them. "Here's something," Noah said after nearly an hour. 3 witnesses described hearing only 1 gunshot. Caleb looked up. Deputy Briggs carried a revolver with 6 rounds. Noah handed him the weapons report. Briggs's revolver had been recovered with 1 empty chamber. Caleb read the examination twice. 1 spent cartridge. Noah frowned. "Wouldn't that fit the report?" Caleb slowly shook his head. "Not necessarily." He reached for the coroner's summary. Deputy Briggs had died from a gunshot wound entering through his back. Caleb laid both documents beside each other. If he was shot from behind, Noah understood immediately. He couldn't have fired at the person behind him. Caleb nodded. Not unless he somehow turned after being mortally wounded. The room fell quiet. It was a small inconsistency, but for the first time, the official version no longer fit perfectly. Caleb marked the page before continuing. They reviewed sketches made at the crime scene. One drawing showed the broken payroll strongbox lying several feet from the stagecoach. Another recorded where Deputy Briggs's body had been found. Caleb noticed measurements written in the margins. The strongbox was dragged. Noah leaned closer. How can you tell? Caleb pointed toward the investigator's notes. Scrape marks in the dirt. I'd forgotten about those. Does it matter? Caleb thought carefully. A robber trying to escape quickly usually takes the money and rides. Dragging a heavy box several yards wastes time. Noah studied the sketch. Unless they were looking for something. Caleb met his eyes. Neither man spoke for several seconds. They reopened the inventory of recovered evidence. Every payroll bag had been listed. Loose coins, torn canvas, broken lock. Caleb slowly turned another page. That's strange. Noah stepped beside him. One line near the bottom of the inventory caught Caleb's attention. Item unavailable. Leather document case not recovered. Was that part of the payroll? Noah asked. Caleb searched deeper into the transportation records. The original shipping manifest described not only payroll funds, but also county paperwork scheduled for delivery to the courthouse. There it is, Caleb said quietly. A locked leather case containing legal documents. Noah frowned. Why wasn't that mentioned during the trial? Caleb searched the remaining reports, but found no explanation. Every investigator had focused on the missing payroll money. The missing document case disappeared from later summaries almost entirely. Caleb leaned back slowly. Maybe because everyone assumed the robbery was about cash. Noah looked again at the inventory. What if it wasn't? The possibility changed everything. Caleb reached for another folder containing statements from Thomas Bennett, the retired stagecoach driver who had survived the attack. Bennett had testified while recovering from injuries, but his account had been considered incomplete because he lost consciousness shortly afterward. Caleb read every page aloud. Bennett described masked riders, dust, confusion, a frightened team of horses. Then one sentence stopped him. One man kept shouting, "Find the case." Noah looked up. Not the money. Caleb read the line again. It clearly said case, not cash or payroll. Somehow no one had questioned it further. Investigators apparently believed the injured driver had become confused. 15 years later, the statement sounded far more important than it once had. Is Bennett still alive? Noah asked. Caleb thought for a moment. I believe so. Retired north of Willow Creek. They left the office the following morning and found Thomas Bennett living in a modest cabin overlooking a hayfield. Age had bent his shoulders, but his memory remained surprisingly clear once Caleb explained why he had come. Bennett listened quietly before asking one question. You finally stopped believing everything in those reports, Caleb answered honestly. I'm trying to. Bennett invited them inside. The old driver described the robbery carefully. He remembered horses blocking the road, masked riders shouting orders, and Deputy Briggs falling almost immediately. Did you see Sarah? Caleb asked. Bennett nodded slowly. After it was nearly over. Doing what? Standing near the coach. Caleb waited. She wasn't gathering money. Then what? Bennett closed his eyes briefly, searching through old memories. She was holding something small. Looked like a leather satchel. Caleb exchanged a quick glance with Noah. The document case. Bennett shrugged gently. Could have been. Did she ride away with the robbers? No. The answer surprised both deputies. Bennett continued. She rode the opposite direction. Caleb remained silent. The old driver rubbed tired eyes before speaking again. One more thing always bothered me. What? Bennett looked directly at Caleb. Deputy Briggs's revolver. Caleb felt his heartbeat quicken. What about it? When I climbed down from the coach after the shooting, his pistol was still in the holster. Noah stared at him. You're certain? As certain as an old man can be. Caleb remembered the evidence report claiming Briggs had fired one shot. Bennett slowly shook his head. Someone fired that gun after he was already dead. They returned to town before dusk, carrying more questions than answers. Caleb unlocked the courthouse archive room and requested transportation records connected to the payroll shipment. An elderly clerk eventually located an aging ledger that had not been opened in years. Caleb carefully turned the brittle pages until he reached the shipment dated the morning of the robbery. Beneath the payroll entry appeared the same notation mentioned earlier, leather legal case enclosed. Attached beneath it was a brief description that had somehow escaped every earlier investigation. Caleb read the final line aloud. Certified ranch ownership records scheduled for county filing. He looked slowly toward Noah. The robbery had never been only about stolen money. The courthouse archive occupied a narrow room few people entered, unless they were searching for old land deeds or forgotten tax records. Dust coated the highest shelves, and faded ledgers filled cabinets that had not been opened in years. Caleb arrived shortly after sunrise, carrying the transportation ledger from the previous evening. Noah followed with the payroll robbery files stacked carefully beneath one arm. The elderly records clerk unlocked another cabinet after Caleb explained what he was looking for. Most of these haven't been touched in decades, the clerk said. Take your time. Caleb thanked him and began comparing ranch ownership records from the months surrounding the robbery. At first, the entries appeared ordinary. Ranches changed hands through sales, inheritances, and mortgage settlements as they always had. But as Noah organized the documents by date, a pattern slowly emerged. Several large properties had transferred ownership within only a few weeks of one another. The paperwork appeared legal on the surface, yet many signatures had been witnessed by the same small group of county officials. Caleb frowned. That's unusual. Noah studied another ledger. These ranches weren't neighbors. Caleb nodded. Exactly. He requested the original filing packets whenever they still existed. Some had been lost over time, but enough remained to compare. Several deeds referenced supporting ownership certificates that were no longer attached. Others contained handwritten corrections added after filing. Caleb carefully matched the dates with the transportation records. The missing leather document case had been scheduled to arrive at the courthouse on the very day the payroll stagecoach was attacked. Those certificates, Noah said quietly, could have been inside the missing case. Caleb looked down at the ledger. If they never arrived, replacement records could have been filed later. Noah understood immediately. And nobody would know the originals disappeared. They spent the remainder of the morning tracing every property connected to the altered filings. Most eventually came under the control of the same expanding cattle syndicate that had grown powerful during the years following the robbery. 15 years earlier, few people would have questioned successful businessmen purchasing struggling ranches. Now Caleb wondered whether every transaction had truly been voluntary. He leaned back in his chair. The robbery wasn't just stealing money. Noah nodded. Someone needed those documents to disappear. Caleb closed the ledger slowly. Which means Sarah may have been protecting something far more important than payroll. They carried copies of the records across town to Dr. Samuel Pierce. The elderly physician welcomed them into his office with quiet concern. He seemed unsurprised to see the old case files resting beneath Caleb's arm. You've started asking the questions I hoped you eventually would, he said softly. Caleb placed the copied deeds on the doctor's desk. I need the truth. Dr. Pierce removed his spectacles and looked at the papers for several long moments before speaking. Some truths become easier to carry with age, he said. Others become heavier. Caleb remained standing. Did Sarah come to you before the robbery? The doctor hesitated, then nodded once. Yes. Why? Because she was frightened. Caleb's heart tightened. For herself? No. The answer came immediately. Never for herself. Noah quietly closed the office door. Dr. Pierce folded his hands together before continuing. She arrived late one evening, carrying a little girl no older than 2. The child had a fever after traveling through the night. Caleb remembered the faded photograph Emma had shown them. Emma. The doctor nodded. Yes. Caleb felt every piece of the story beginning to shift. Who was she? Dr. Pierce looked directly at him. An orphan, after her parents were killed. Silence settled over the room. Sarah asked me to treat the child without recording her name. The doctor continued. She said people were searching for her. Caleb asked quietly. Did Sarah explain why? Only that the child had to remain alive until she was old enough to understand who she was. Noah glanced toward the copied land records. Did Sarah mention the missing documents? Dr. Pierce slowly shook his head. Not directly. She was careful with every word. Caleb walked to the office window, looking out toward the familiar street where he had spent most of his adult life, believing Sarah had betrayed him. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, without turning around. Dr. Pierce answered with obvious regret. Because I promised her. Caleb faced him again. You let me believe she was guilty. Pain crossed the old physician's face. I let you believe she was carrying a burden she chose herself. Caleb struggled with the answer. Anger rose inside him, but it faded almost as quickly as it came. Sarah had trusted very few people. Dr. Pierce had honored that trust for 15 years. What finally changed? Caleb asked. Time. The doctor lowered his eyes. And the knowledge that Emma is no longer a helpless child. Noah leaned forward. Emma doesn't know any of this. No, Dr. Pierce replied gently. Sarah wanted her to grow up without fear. Caleb returned to the desk. You said Emma would one day understand who she was. The doctor hesitated one final time before speaking. She is the lawful heir to the ranch whose ownership records disappeared with that leather case. The room fell completely silent. Caleb looked at the copied deeds scattered across the desk. If the original certificates had reached the courthouse, ownership would have been legally protected. Without them, replacement filings could have changed everything. Sarah was protecting the last surviving heir, he whispered. Dr. Pierce nodded. That was all she ever cared about. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. He remembered Sarah standing beside the corral 15 years earlier, refusing to defend herself, while quietly saying other people would pay the price if she spoke. At the time, he believed she was avoiding responsibility. Now those words carried an entirely different meaning. Before leaving, Dr. Pierce unlocked a small cabinet in the corner of his office. From the back, he removed a weathered cloth bundle tied with faded string. She asked me to keep this hidden until the day someone finally began searching for the truth instead of the easiest answer. Caleb accepted the bundle carefully. Inside lay a worn leather journal, its cover scarred by years of travel. Sarah Whitmore's name had been written neatly across the first page. Tucked beneath the cover rested a folded note in her handwriting. Caleb unfolded it slowly. It contained only one sentence. If you're reading this, then Emma is finally safe enough for the truth. Caleb carried Sarah's journal back to the sheriff's office without opening it. 15 years earlier, he had arrested the woman he loved because every piece of evidence demanded it. Now he found himself afraid of the truth resting inside a worn leather cover. Noah quietly lit the oil lamp as evening settled outside. Neither man spoke while Caleb untied the faded string holding the journal closed. The first pages contained ordinary entries. Sarah wrote about repairing fences after spring storms, helping neighbors during calving season, and planning the small house she and Caleb hoped to build. She described him with quiet affection, never using grand words, only simple observations that made his chest tighten. Caleb still pretends coffee tastes fine even when it's burned. He worries more than he admits. He always keeps his promises. Noah smiled faintly while listening. She really loved you. Caleb nodded, but kept reading. Several pages later, the tone changed. Sarah began writing about the ranch owner from the faded photograph. His name was Daniel Harper. He and his wife had become close friends after losing relatives to illness. Their little daughter, Emma, often spent afternoons at the Whitmore Ranch, chasing chickens and feeding horses. Sarah wrote that Daniel had become increasingly worried about land records scheduled for delivery to the county courthouse. He believed someone was attempting to take control of several neighboring ranches through fraudulent ownership claims. At first, Sarah admitted she thought he was simply being cautious. Then another entry described Daniel arriving unexpectedly after dark. He looked frightened in a way I had never seen before, she wrote. He told me if anything happened to him, Emma must never be left alone. Caleb slowly lowered the journal. The words felt painfully real. Noah remained silent, allowing him to continue when he was ready. Sarah's entries became less frequent but more urgent. Daniel believed certified ownership records traveling with the payroll shipment would prove several ranches belonged to families who were suddenly being pressured to sell. Without those original documents, replacing the records would become much easier. Sarah never claimed to understand every legal detail, only that Daniel insisted the papers mattered more than money. Caleb turned another page. The handwriting became uneven, as though written in great haste. Daniel and his wife are dead. Everyone says it was an accident. I know better. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. He remembered the old reports describing the ranch owner's death as unrelated to the payroll robbery. Reading Sarah's words made that conclusion feel painfully incomplete. She continued writing that before his death, Daniel had placed Emma in her care. He trusted me because he knew Caleb would always choose the law. I pray one day Caleb understands why I cannot tell him everything. Caleb stopped reading. His hands had begun to tremble. She knew, he whispered. Noah looked across the desk. Knew what? That I would arrest her. He stared at the page. Sarah had written those words before the robbery ever occurred. She never questioned Caleb's honesty. Instead, she relied on it. She believed he would never ignore evidence simply because he loved her. The realization hurt more deeply than anything he had discovered so far. Sarah had trusted his character completely, even though it guaranteed losing him. Caleb continued reading. The final entries before the robbery described Sarah preparing to intercept the stagecoach after learning the legal documents might disappear before reaching the courthouse. She hoped only to secure the leather case long enough to protect Emma's future. She never mentioned planning a robbery. She never described stealing money. Instead, she repeatedly worried about arriving too late. One entry ended with a single sentence. If I fail, Emma loses everything before she is old enough to know what was taken. Caleb turned to the next page. The handwriting had become hurried again. I saw Caleb today. He smiled at me across the street. I almost told him everything. The next line had been written more carefully. But if he knows, he must act. I will never ask him to betray his oath for me. Caleb rested both hands on the desk. Memories flooded back with painful clarity. He remembered Sarah's unusual silence during those final days. He had mistaken it for distance. Now he understood she had been carrying a burden she refused to place upon him. Noah quietly asked, "What happened after the robbery?" Caleb turned several pages. The journal resumed after Sarah's disappearance. The first entry had been written only hours after the prison guard released her. She thanked William Harlan for believing her without demanding explanations. Then she described traveling through the night with Emma, changing roads constantly, and depending on trusted friends whose names she intentionally never recorded. Caleb noticed one sentence written alone across an otherwise blank page. "Every mile away from Caleb feels like another life I can never have." He swallowed hard before reading further. Sarah never blamed him. Not once. She wrote that the arrest had broken his heart, as surely as it had broken hers. But she insisted he had done exactly what an honest sheriff should have done. "If Caleb had ignored the evidence because he loved me," she wrote, "he would no longer be the man I promised to marry." Caleb removed his hat and lowered his head. For 15 years he had carried guilt, believing he had failed Sarah. Now he realized she had never stopped believing in him. Tears slipped quietly down his face before he could hide them. Noah looked away, giving his sheriff the privacy of silence. After a long moment, Caleb wiped his eyes and continued. The journal recorded years spent moving from town to town, while secretly watching Emma grow. Sarah carefully arranged financial support through trusted friends and anonymous deliveries. She celebrated Emma's birthdays from a distance whenever she could not visit. Every entry revealed sacrifice rather than bitterness. Near the end of the journal, Sarah reflected on the possibility that Caleb might someday reopen the case. "If he ever begins asking questions again," she wrote, "it will not be because he stopped loving me. It will be because he never stopped searching for what is right." Caleb stared at the page until the words blurred. The final completed entry ended without complaint or regret. "I would rather spend my life carrying the blame than allow Emma to carry the danger. If Caleb one day learns the truth, I hope he forgives himself before he forgives me." Noah quietly closed the journal after Caleb finished reading. Neither man spoke for several minutes. At last, Noah noticed something tucked inside the back cover. It was a folded piece of paper, smaller than the journal pages. Caleb carefully unfolded it. It contained only a rough sketch of a narrow mountain valley, a cabin beside a stream, and one handwritten sentence beneath the drawing. "If these pages ever reach Caleb, tell him I'll be waiting where the river bends beneath Eagle Ridge." At first light the next morning, Caleb and Noah saddled their horses and left Black Creek with Sarah's journal carefully wrapped inside Caleb's saddlebag. The hand-drawn map from the final page pointed toward Eagle Ridge, a rugged stretch of mountains few travelers crossed unless they knew the trails well. The route followed a winding river before climbing through thick pine forests and narrow passes where wagon wheels could barely fit between the rocks. Caleb studied the map each time the trail divided. Sarah had drawn only the landmarks she believed he would recognize: a split boulder, a fallen cedar spanning the creek, and a sharp bend where the river curved beneath a towering cliff. She had trusted that he would remember the country they had once explored together. By late afternoon, they reached the river bend. The sound of flowing water echoed between the hills, and smoke drifted faintly above the trees. Noah pointed ahead. Cabin. Hidden among tall pines stood a small, weathered cabin built from rough logs. A vegetable garden grew beside the porch. Firewood had been stacked neatly beneath an overhanging roof. Nothing suggested fear or flight. Instead, the place felt quietly lived in. Caleb dismounted but remained standing beside his horse. 15 years of unanswered questions had brought him to this single moment. He suddenly found himself uncertain how to take the next step. Noah rested a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to say everything at once. Caleb nodded, though he was no longer sure words would be enough. Before either man reached the porch, the cabin door opened slowly. A woman stepped outside carrying a basket of freshly washed clothes. She paused after seeing the horses. Time had added silver to her dark hair and gentle lines around her eyes. But Caleb recognized her immediately. Sarah Whitmore stood completely still. The basket slipped slightly in her hands, though she never let it fall. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. 15 years disappeared into silence. Finally, Sarah set the basket on the porch. Hello, Caleb. Her voice remained as calm and familiar as he remembered. Caleb removed his hat. Hello, Sarah. She looked briefly toward Noah before returning her attention to Caleb. I thought it might be you someday. Caleb searched her face. He expected bitterness, anger, or disappointment. He found none of them. Instead, he saw quiet relief, mixed with sadness. You knew I'd come? Sarah smiled gently. Only if you found the journal. Caleb stepped closer. I read every page. She lowered her eyes. Then you know why I couldn't tell you. I do now. The simple answer seemed to lift a weight she had carried for years. Sarah invited them inside. The cabin was modest but warm. Shelves filled with books lined one wall. A small table stood beside the fireplace, and fresh bread cooled on the windowsill. It looked less like the hiding place of an outlaw than the peaceful home of someone who had long ago accepted a quieter life. Sarah poured coffee for both visitors before taking a seat across from Caleb. Neither hurried to speak. At last, Caleb reached into his coat and placed the faded engagement ring box on the table. He had carried it without fully realizing why. Sarah looked at it, but made no attempt to open it. You kept it, she whispered. I couldn't throw it away. Tears gathered in her eyes. Neither could I. Caleb drew a slow breath. Why didn't you send word that you were alive? Sarah folded her hands together. Because if anyone found me, they might find Emma. The danger ended years ago. I didn't know when it truly ended. She looked toward the window where sunlight filtered through the pines. Every year I asked myself if it was finally safe. Every year I decided not to risk her life on hope. Caleb nodded slowly. He no longer questioned that choice. He understood it. I arrested you. Sarah met his eyes. You had to. I should have seen there was more to the story. She shook her head gently. How could you? I never gave you the chance. Caleb lowered his gaze. I spent 15 years believing I failed you. Sarah reached across the table and rested her hand lightly over his. You never failed me. He looked up. She smiled through quiet tears. You were the only man I trusted to choose what was right, even when it broke your heart. Caleb felt the truth of those words settle inside him. The anger he had carried toward himself slowly gave way to something gentler. Regret remained, But regret no longer stood alone. They spoke for hours. Sarah described the years after William Harlan secretly released her. She never stayed in one place for long until Emma grew older. Friends helped when they could. Dr. Pierce arranged medicine. Anonymous letters carried money for Emma's care. Sarah worked wherever she found honest employment, always remaining far enough away that no one would connect her to the child. She never once complained about the sacrifice. Watching Emma grow into a good person made every lonely year worthwhile, she said. Caleb listened quietly. She thinks of you as Aunt Sarah. A warm smile crossed Sarah's face. That's enough. Caleb hesitated before asking his next question. Would you come back with me? Sarah looked toward the mountains beyond the window. Has the truth really come far enough? Caleb told her about the reopened investigation, the missing legal records, Dr. Pierce's confession, Thomas Bennett's testimony, and Emma herself. Sarah listened without interrupting. When he finished, she remained silent for several moments. Emma still doesn't know who she really is, she said softly. Not yet. Sarah nodded. Then I can't return until she does. Caleb understood immediately. Clearing Sarah's name meant nothing if Emma first learned the truth through gossip or courtroom testimony. She deserves to hear it from someone who loves her, Sarah said, not from strangers reading legal papers. Caleb agreed. Then we'll do it the right way. As evening approached, Noah quietly stepped outside, leaving them alone. Sarah walked with Caleb to the edge of the river where the water curved beneath Eagle Ridge exactly as she had drawn in the journal. The peaceful sound of the current filled the silence between them. I used to wonder whether you hated me, Caleb admitted. Sarah smiled sadly. Never. I worried you hated yourself. He looked away. Sometimes I did. Sarah gently touched his arm. Then don't carry that any longer. Before they returned to the cabin, hoofbeats echoed faintly along the distant trail. Noah appeared between the trees, leading another horse behind his own. Emma rode quietly beside him, her expression uncertain after Noah had explained only that someone important wished to see her. Sarah stopped walking. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. Emma climbed down from the saddle and looked from Caleb to the woman standing beside the river. After a long silence, she spoke the only name she had ever known. Aunt Sarah. Emma stood motionless beside the river, her eyes fixed on Sarah as though she feared the woman might disappear if she blinked. Sarah slowly stepped forward, tears slipping freely down her face for the first time since Caleb had arrived. Hello, Emma, she whispered. Emma searched her expression before crossing the remaining distance in hurried steps. She wrapped both arms around Sarah without another word. Sarah held her tightly, closing her eyes as 15 years of waiting quietly came to an end. Caleb and Noah remained where they stood, allowing the reunion to belong entirely to them. After several long moments, Emma pulled back just enough to study Sarah's face. Why have you been gone so long? She asked softly. Sarah gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from Emma's forehead. Because I wanted you to have the chance to grow up safely. Emma frowned with quiet confusion. Safe from what? Sarah looked toward Caleb. He nodded once. The time for silence had ended. They returned together to the cabin, where evening settled gently outside the windows. Sarah placed the old photograph on the table between them. Emma smiled as she recognized the picture she had kept for years. I've always wondered who the man beside you was, she admitted. Sarah rested one hand on the faded frame. His name was Daniel Harper. She paused before continuing. He was your father." Emma stared at her in silence. Sarah carefully explained everything she could without anger or bitterness. She spoke of Daniel and his wife, of the promise she made after their deaths, and of the danger that surrounded the missing ownership records. She admitted that she could never tell Emma the truth while there remained any chance the people responsible would discover where she was. Emma listened quietly, tears filling her eyes as the life she thought she understood slowly changed before her. "So, my name was never really Emma Reed?" she asked. Sarah smiled gently. "The Millers loved you as their own, and the name they gave you protected you. But you were born Emma Harper." Emma looked down at the photograph again. "You gave up everything for me." Sarah reached across the table. "I gave up years. Never you." Silence filled the cabin until Emma quietly stood and embraced Sarah once more. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb turned toward the window, giving them privacy as emotion settled over the room. The following morning, the four of them returned to Black Creek together. Sarah rode openly beside Caleb for the first time in 15 years. Some townspeople recognized her immediately as they entered the main street. Conversations stopped. Shopkeepers stepped outside. Faces filled with surprise rather than fear. No wanted posters remained on the buildings, yet everyone remembered the woman once branded an outlaw. Caleb guided his horse directly to the courthouse. Noah had already arranged for witnesses to gather. Thomas Bennett arrived carrying his cane. Dr. Samuel Pierce came with copies of Sarah's journal pages and his own written statement. William Harlan's signed confession, prepared shortly before his death, had been delivered from the county prison. Emma waited quietly beside Sarah while Caleb organized every document collected during the investigation. By afternoon, the county judge agreed to reopen the original case. The courtroom filled with townspeople curious to hear why a 15-year-old conviction had suddenly returned to public attention. Caleb stood before the court not as a man defending the woman he loved, but as the sheriff presenting newly discovered evidence. He described William Harlan's confession that Sarah had never escaped prison. Thomas Bennett testified that Deputy Owen Briggs's revolver had remained holstered after the shooting, and that Sarah rode away carrying what appeared to be the missing leather document case rather than stolen payroll money. Dr. Pierce confirmed Sarah had been protecting a young orphan whose identity had been deliberately concealed. Finally, Caleb presented the courthouse ledgers showing that the missing legal case contained certified ranch ownership records which never reached county archives. The courtroom remained completely silent as each piece fit together. Emma then stepped forward. Though nervous, she spoke clearly. She identified herself as Emma Harper and presented the photograph. Sarah's letters and the surviving records preserved through the years. Caleb submitted copies of the altered property filings discovered in the archives alongside the original transportation ledger identifying the missing ownership certificates. The judge examined every page carefully. Several county officials quietly compared dates and signatures while reviewing the records. What had once appeared to be an ordinary payroll robbery now revealed itself as a crime reaching far beyond stolen money. The missing legal documents had changed the future of an entire ranch and the child who should have inherited it. Sarah never interrupted the proceedings. She answered every question honestly and simply. She admitted taking possession of the leather document case, but denied stealing payroll money or killing Deputy Briggs. Her purpose, she explained, had always been protecting Emma until the rightful ownership could one day be restored. When asked why she never defended herself during her arrest, Sarah looked briefly toward Caleb before answering, because speaking too soon would have placed Emma in greater danger. The judge nodded thoughtfully. After reviewing the testimony, he announced a short recess to examine the evidence privately with the county clerk. No one left the courtroom. Townspeople whispered quietly among themselves, many remembering Sarah as the kind young woman they had known before the robbery. Caleb sat alone near the front bench. Noah joined him after several minutes. "Whatever happens now," Noah said quietly, "you found the truth." Caleb looked towards Sarah and Emma speaking softly together across the room. "That's what should have happened 15 years ago." The courtroom doors finally opened again. The judge returned to the bench carrying a neatly organized stack of documents. Everyone rose as he took his seat. He looked carefully across the room before speaking. "After reviewing the newly presented evidence, this court is prepared to issue its official ruling." The courtroom remained silent as the judge rested both hands upon the bench and looked across the gathered crowd. His eye settled first on Sarah, then on Caleb, before finally stopping on the carefully arranged evidence covering the clerk's table. "This court has reviewed the newly presented testimony, the written confession of former prison guard William Harlan, the statements of Thomas Bennett and Dr. Samuel Pierce, the transportation records, the ownership ledgers, and the documents submitted concerning Emma Harper." He paused, allowing every word to settle over the room. "The original conviction against Sarah Whitmore cannot stand." A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. The judge continued, "The evidence no longer supports the finding that Miss Whitmore participated in the payroll robbery or murdered Deputy Owen Briggs. The court further recognizes that she removed the leather document case in an effort to preserve legal records connected to the rightful inheritance of Emma Harper." He lifted the official order. "Accordingly, all criminal charges against Sarah Whitmore are dismissed. Her conviction is vacated. Her name is hereby cleared." Sarah closed her eyes as though releasing a burden she had carried for half her life. Emma reached for her hand immediately. Caleb remained perfectly still, but the weight that had rested upon his shoulders for 15 years seemed to disappear with a single sentence. The judge was not yet finished. The court also orders a full review of the altered ranch ownership filings identified during this investigation. Emma Harper's legal claim shall be restored according to the surviving certified evidence. Emma lowered her head, overwhelmed. She had arrived believing she possessed nothing beyond the family who raised her. Now she understood that her parents' wishes had not been lost forever. The hearing concluded quietly. No celebration broke the solemn mood. Instead, townspeople slowly approached Sarah one by one. Some offered apologies for believing the wanted posters without question. Others simply removed their hats and shook her hand. Sarah accepted every gesture with quiet grace. She neither blamed nor condemned anyone. Caleb watched from a short distance until the room gradually emptied. When only Noah, Emma, Dr. Pierce, Thomas Bennett, and the county clerk remained, Caleb finally walked towards Sarah. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb removed the old sheriff's badge from his vest and laid it gently on the clerk's table. Noah looked at him with surprise. Caleb smiled faintly. Only for a few minutes. He picked up another object, instead the faded arrest warrant that had once sent him to Sarah's ranch. Folding it carefully, he carried it to the courthouse stove and fed it into the fire. The brittle paper curled, darkened, and disappeared into ash. Sarah watched quietly. "You kept it all these years?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "I thought it reminded me to follow the law." He looked into the flames. "Now it reminds me to keep searching until the truth catches up with the evidence." Sarah stepped beside him. That's the sheriff I always believed in. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun warmed the dusty street. Word of the ruling spread quickly through Black Creek. Shopkeepers smiled as Sarah walked past. Children who knew nothing of the old case simply waved politely. The town no longer looked at her as an outlaw. They looked at her as someone finally returning home. Over the following weeks, county officials corrected the property records. The surviving legal documents, Sarah's preserved journal, and the courthouse ledgers together restored Emma Harper as the lawful heir to her parents' ranch. The land itself had changed over the years, but the judgment recognized the injustice that had deprived her family of it. Emma accepted the ruling with humility. She visited the Miller farm often, insisting Jonathan and Martha would always remain her parents in every way that truly mattered. They embraced her with tears and pride, grateful that love had never depended upon a surname. Doctor, Pierce continued treating patients as he always had, though the burden he carried seemed noticeably lighter. Before leaving one afternoon, Sarah thanked him for honoring his promise despite the cost. The old physician simply smiled. Promises matter most when they become difficult. Thomas Bennett returned to his quiet cabin, knowing his forgotten memories had finally helped uncover the truth. Noah remained Caleb's deputy, but their partnership had changed. More than once he caught his sheriff studying old case files with greater patience than before. Caleb never again accepted an easy answer simply because it appeared complete. Every investigation deserved the same careful honesty Sarah's story had demanded. One cool evening, several months after the trial, Caleb rode alone to the small cemetery where Daniel Harper, his wife, and Deputy Owen Briggs rested beneath neighboring cottonwoods. Fresh flowers already lay beside the Harper graves. Sarah stood there quietly, having arrived before him. They greeted one another with familiar smiles before standing together in respectful silence. Caleb removed his hat before Deputy Briggs's grave. "I couldn't save your reputation sooner," he said softly, "but the truth finally reached us both." Sarah placed fresh wildflowers beside Daniel and his wife. "Emma knows how much they loved her," she whispered. "That's what they deserved." As they walked back toward their horses, Caleb noticed the old engagement ring box still resting inside his saddlebag. He hesitated only a moment before removing it. Sarah looked at the worn box and smiled with quiet recognition. Caleb laughed softly. "I've carried this for 15 years. "I know." "I don't suppose there's a proper rule for asking the same question twice." Sarah's eyes filled with gentle tears. Caleb opened the small box. The simple gold ring still rested inside exactly as it had years before. "Life took us down a road neither of us wanted," he said. "But if you're willing, I'd like to spend whatever years we have left walking the next part together." Sarah did not answer immediately. She reached for his hand, the same hand that had once placed irons around her wrists because duty demanded it, and now held it with complete trust. "I never stopped saying yes in my heart," she whispered. Caleb slipped the ring gently onto her finger. No crowd witnessed the moment. No music filled the air. Only the quiet wind moved through the cottonwood leaves above them. It was enough. The following spring, the people of Black Creek gathered outside the little white church near the abandoned mill where Caleb had first searched for Emma. Jonathan and Martha Miller sat in the front row beside Emma, who smiled through happy tears as Sarah walked slowly down the aisle. Noah stood proudly beside Caleb. Dr. Pierce attended despite leaning heavily upon his cane. Thomas Bennett traveled from Willow Creek so he would not miss the day. When the ceremony ended, the church bell rang across the valley. Neighbors shared food beneath the trees while children ran laughing through the grass. For the first time in many years, Sarah no longer needed to watch happiness from a distance. As evening settled, Caleb and Sarah remained alone outside the church for a few quiet moments. The fading sunlight painted the fields in warm gold. Caleb looked across the valley where so much of their story had begun. "You once told me I'd understand why you let me hate you," he said. Sarah rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "You never really hated me." Caleb smiled. "No. I just hadn't found the truth yet." Together they watched Emma laughing with the Miller family, surrounded by the people who had loved and protected her throughout her life. The sacrifice that had once seemed unbearable had given a child a future, preserved an honest man's oath, and finally returned an innocent woman's name. The law had taken 15 years to reach the truth, but when it finally did, justice belonged not only to the innocent who had been accused, but also to those who had never stopped believing that the truth was worth waiting for. The greatest mystery was never who robbed the payroll or why Sarah disappeared. The real mystery was why an innocent woman willingly accepted being remembered as an outlaw for 15 long years. The truth was far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. Sarah Whitmore never stole the payroll. She never murdered Deputy Owen Briggs. She took only the leather case containing the original ranch ownership records because she knew those documents were the only proof that little Emma Harper was the rightful heir to her parents' land. When Daniel Harper and his wife were killed, Sarah made a promise to protect their daughter, no matter the cost. She knew that if she explained the truth too soon, Emma would become the next target. So she chose silence. She allowed the town to condemn her. She allowed Caleb, the man she loved most, to arrest her without resistance, because she trusted that an honest sheriff must always follow the evidence before his heart. She sacrificed her home, her future, her reputation, and the life she dreamed of so that one innocent child could grow up alive and free. Years later, Caleb discovered that justice is not simply enforcing the law. It is having the courage to keep searching when the first answer seems too convenient. By reopening a case everyone believed was finished, he restored Sarah's good name, returned Emma's rightful inheritance, and honored the memory of those who had been silenced. In the end, Sarah was never remembered as the outlaw history claimed she was. She became something far greater, a guardian who gave away her own happiness so another person could have a future. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all. Real courage is often quiet. True sacrifice is rarely celebrated when it happens. The people who protect others most completely are sometimes the very ones the world misunderstands. Truth may arrive years late, but it never loses its value. Justice may move slowly, but it is worth pursuing until the very end. And love, when it is genuine, is not measured by the years spent together, but by the sacrifices willingly made for someone else's future.